So I'm going to share my whole desktop. Hopefully you guys can see that.
We can see, you're good to go.
Perfect, okay. And just to the previous group, we had Simon Wardley in here doing some training on Wardley maps, which really helps you kind of understand how you want to recraft and present your organization. And it's his birthday today, so that's top of mind to say happy birthday to Simon Wardley, and you should definitely check out the Wardley maps. There's a good community here that can help you with that. But into Devcontainers and Jupyter Notebooks to help out with the semi-toil stuff. So in the summer, I did a little demo for Elena's team on a number of things that we're doing over at the registry. And one of the things that we had as a problem was developers spend time setting up for different projects. We have like 60 plus services running that require different things. So getting people up to speed can be interesting. Always works on my desktop, doesn't always work on everybody else's, right? So there's like, how do you get around some of those things? There's having to install Oracle libraries if you're connected to some of those other systems. And none of that really provides a lot of value to the developers, right? So we wanted to make things a little bit quicker and easier. And then, running Docker on strict Windows is still, kind of ugly, getting VMs to run. But Windows subsystem for Linux, that really is pretty hot. So we had some directions of things we wanted to look at. And around that time, the Devcontainer stuff was coming out in early access through GitHub. And so we started to look at that because we do a lot of work with those guys. And we looked at what some other major groups do, like the Belgian government. They have preset VMs. So if you're a developer, you say, I want to do this kind of project. It gives you a VM. It gives you a bunch of deployment environments and everything's all hooked up, which is pretty cool, but it's pretty hard to maintain those VMs, to be honest, having maintained those for them. And then, HashiCorp, they use NixOS and Vagrant a lot. Google, they use Chrome OS, so all their stuff is built in containers and out there through their browsers. So they have very thin desktops. And then VS Code had this Devcontainer thing, like we said, that was kicking off. And it made us kind of look at it a little bit because we got Windows, Macs, Linux, Chrome OS users, and the VS Code is based on Chromium, so it's based on the Chrome browser. So it's got some neat features to it, and then it's all these little services that are actually talking together. It's actually a client server application, and we can start to break that apart. So I can run the front end of VS Code on my system and the back end elsewhere. And Microsoft is really moving heavily towards that so they could get this VS Code server with your source code running in Windows Subsystem for Linux, which, if you don't have that installed, you're really missing out. I'm running on a Mac, but having worked that on Windows, it's a nice environment to work in. So getting this up and going requires just a small .dev container dropped into your project, kind of wherever. If you want to have it used globally, you'll want to put it at the root of your project, but you can also put it in separate spots, as I'll show you. And inside of the Devcontainer directory is two files, a Devcontainer JSON and a Docker file. And the Docker file, is there to tell how to build the image you're going to run in. And the Devcontainer says, how do we want it to run, right? So if I pop over to VS Code, you can see this is my standard when I'm running on my desktop. It's got all sorts of nifty extra plugins. I've got my pair programming plugin here. I got my Copilot there, but Copilot is still, limited access. So I can't put that into a common container for my team to use. And here I've got a Devcontainer already up and running. And when it starts up, it's going to look into this file. As you can see, I've got a bunch of stuff commented out because I can either run as pre-built images or I can have it build based on the Docker file that's contained in here. And it's a standard sort of approach for the Docker files that we like to use within government, which is, I've got a user, I can come in as root and install stuff. I come back and set myself as user. And in this case, I'm installing all the Oracle libraries so that my team doesn't have to figure out how to install the Oracle, because all they're really wanting to do is fix some code or work on that kind of stuff. What that looks like is if I was to start a new project or open a project that had a dev container in there, as soon as I go and open it, it's gonna prompt me and say, hey, do you want to reopen in this container? So I'm going to bypass some of this stuff and do sort of the Julia Child. I'm probably dating myself here a little bit, but do the Julia Child where I take the cake out of the oven right away. So that's what I've got running inside of here is this container. And like I said, I'm running on my Mac, but if I ask what am I running on, you can see I'm running on Arch Linux, right? So that's the architecture that I'm on. It's the ARM architecture, 64-bit Linux. It's running here. I can also run an x86 based one. I was able to get all my Oracle stuff installed on ARM, so it runs a little faster because my box is a native ARM setup. And once I'm inside of this container, I can have any sort of plugins already installed and in place. So when my team opens up this dev container, they're basically running and working exactly like I work. So I know it kind of works. Same sort of idea that we want to have like for container development, where I build my container and I push it up to OpenShift and I know that it works there once it passes its tests. I can do the same sort of thing here. And you can see I've got a notebook open. And Microsoft's VS Code gives me a really nice development environment for my notebooks, where I've got all the cells that I can then run, or I can launch the notebook server like I've done here. And I'm gonna jump into the back half of my presentation. But before I get into the notebooks, just wanted to show you a couple of examples of what this can look like for me, right? So now I'm up in GitHub and I've put my dev container at my base, right? So I can do the regular sort of thing where I hit period and that takes me into my GitHub editor, which allows me to do some nice editing and that kind of stuff. But I can also go over here and launch my code space, which is going to launch my dev container up in GitHub land. I can connect it to the VS Code on my desktop, or I can just let it connect into the browser. Because like I showed you in that presentation, the front end of my browser and the back end is how VS Code is using that Electron service, right? So I've got my dev container, I've got my application. In this case, this is where we keep our schemas for files that are sent to us. So we have to maintain a corporate corporate registry, and the corporate registry legislation says we have to change stuff by particular filings. So I can do a change of directors. And so I've got my JSON schema definition for that, which is OAS3 compliant, to throw around some more acronyms. But inside of here, I can go and I can see I've got all my tests, right? And I can pick a test, I can run that whole suite. They run pretty quick because it's a 4-core box with a good amount of RAM. And I can run quite a bit before I even get close to having to pay for any of the services. So it's a full development environment. The other nice part for me is if I want to be able to do pull requests, I can pull that, open up any of those pieces. I'm not sitting here at the moment, but I could grab a pull request, open it up in here. I don't have to install anything on my laptop. I can try out, I can run the tests, I can do linting, I can do comments, and I can do all that inside of my browser without having to install anything locally. And GitHub itself, I think last month, they announced that they're doing all of their development. 100% of their developers now are all through this interface. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I have a pretty good announcement for them, recommendation. There's some other sorts of cool things that you can add in for your dev containers. Just keep track of time. You know, you can add in parts where you got these online interactive plugins. So this renders my UI. I didn't write this, so I'm just borrowing somebody else's demo of using that. But this is a, you know, rock, paper, scissors type environment. Here's all the JavaScript for it. Here's the styles. Here's the HTML, and you can have a code tour for your team, right? So this is how you're going to be able to use the system, right? If you want to change code, come over here and look at this, you know, so you can help onboard people into your environment. And depending on how big or how fast your team is moving or how many teams you've got going, picking a sample application and running this all through a dev container with some of these things where you can have interaction and these code tours is pretty powerful. Now the code spaces that I showed you, you know, they do cost over time, but you can just come in and ask for all the code spaces that are running in your system. If you're not doing anything with it, GitHub will like shut them down and archive them. So they take a little bit longer to start up again if you haven't used them. But you know, like this one that's on this project for me, it's not, you know, it's not charging me anymore. It's shut down. This one, I'm on the clock for that, and it's clocked, I think, at a per minute billing cycle. But I can, you know, delete them, or I can open up from a browser and go to that session and start working on that application. So I don't, again, have to install anything locally, and it gives me one spot to see all of my code spaces. Now to kind of dogleg into the next part, within the registries, like I showed you, we have all these filings that are coming in. So we've got, I think there's 300 some odd different filings that we're kind of pushing down into a smaller set of things that can be done. But some of the things, you know, are just required by legislation that we need to do. We've taken our applications and we've made them very focused on the casual user. And we've got an API gateway that's set up that's connected into the payment system and VC services card and a few other identity pieces, so that our large users can just use the APIs directly and get billed and log in, and we know who they are through that mechanism. But because we're putting on that nicer front end, that takes a bit more effort and research with our users. And the back end, we can just keep on developing because it's pretty set what we need to make, right? Like, you know, a change of directors isn't going to change it all. You know, the kinds of data that we put in. So the back end can be built. And because of that, we can also put in filings early. So we have our operations environment. So way down this tree, I've got another dev container inside of here, which is going to be very specific for what we need to do to manage filings that we haven't built a UI for yet, and other approaches that we want to take. So I've already got that workbook open. And you can see here, I've got a number of different things. So ones that are completed. I did an alteration filing for one of our companies. Again, it was a filing we don't yet support, but what I can do with these notebooks, running a Jupyter notebook, is I can put a lot of documentation in, and I can link it. I can have all sorts of checkboxes and pieces. And so it's like a wiki page kind of idea that's executable. You can kind of think of it like that. And after I've run it, why I've saved it like that is so that my team can look at it the next day. Like if there's something wrong, they can see exactly what I did. So all of the intermediate steps, the data that I pulled out of the system, how I massaged it, how I pushed it back to the system, they can all see that, which makes support a lot easier. So there's still some toil in our SRE mechanism, but at least we can start to make things a little easier. I've got things to help for test beds, for integration tests, because we've got all these services. In some cases, I want to have a whole bunch of test data set up. In this case, I can call other workbooks. So I've got another workbook with all my connections and settings and secrets, and I don't want everybody to see that. But I also don't want to have to type it in every single time, so I can just run that other notebook, which includes all of that stuff into my environment here. And then, you know, I'm going to create an alteration filing, create a change of address, a change of director filing, and just load them all up. So I've got a whole bunch of them so that my testers can go in and test with a bunch of data from a known starting point. You know, all sorts of other stuff. I've got, because we're moving to this private repo that Elena helped us get. Thank you, Elena. You know, because we're moving to that, we still have a bunch of operational issues in our public repo. So, you know, I've got a little notebook here that goes through, grabs all of those, puts it into a Google spreadsheet, and puts that into our chat channel. So in Rocket Chat, if I go to my ops thing, you know, I can see here's my my little robot for my notebook that's run automatically, because we can check them in and have them run on a periodic basis. And we do a lot of reports using that environment as well. You know, I can have it put out, here's all the outstanding ops tickets that are still in the old environment to look at. And I got a few that I need to complete today, so better get on that. You know, and I can put in all sorts of graphs. So this, these notebooks are ones that get run every morning, and we publish them, and management can come and take a look at these sorts of graphs that we can then pull and put into a better dashboard or a prettier one. But as we're starting to work on that, you know, I and my team, we can start to build out these things, work it out how we want it. Once we've got it done, then we just put it into the system that runs them every day. And just to add a little to the coolness of what's going on in the whole notebook environment now is this, what you're seeing here is a notebook that's all running using Piolite. So this usually, if you've heard of WASM before, it's WebAssembly. And so what is running in my browser, not on some server, but in my browser, is a full Python development environment running as a web assembly application. So that allows me to run all of these nifty little bits. And in this case, you know, we can even do things like run Vue.js applications or little snippets of them, because I can still call them from my Python environment. So my Python environment is emulating some JavaScript and doing some templates, and then building and rendering them inside of these environments. So I would have another set of these diagrams that are coming up in one of our next releases, where the diagram itself is very interactive, because I can run the diagram as a live Python class in the browser, and then have my user manipulate it there so they can dive in and do a bunch of stuff. And that's all nice open source, easy clonable stuff to be able to do. And I think I've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to show you guys.
Thor, you got a question here from Wade.
Oh, yeah.
Wade, go ahead.
Less of a question, more of a comment. I just wanted to reiterate that Devcontainers are awesome. I've been working with Hyperledger Indy for a while now, and we have some pretty complicated projects. And we're going to be using solving those with Devcontainers, because we have the same problems where super complicated environments to set up and run the tests, and the Devcontainers just make it so much easier. So onboarding new open source developers is way easier. So yeah, jump on it, people.
Thank you, guys. Just 1 second. I'm going to stop recording, and we can continue with the questions after.
Sure.
Thank you for the great demo, Thor.